My name is Janae Strachey, and this is On Air with Heritage Action, a podcast built for conservatives. Twice a week, we break down in 5-ish minutes or less how you can get involved today in the fight for conservative values.
Hi, I'm Carson. This is a special edition of On Air with Heritage Action. Today we're joined by Director of Government Relations, Ryan Walker, to talk about Biden's border crisis, how we got here, and where we're going. Ryan, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Biden's, the border is obviously in crisis. We've had a record of 1.7 million migrants encountered at the border last year. This year, we're on track for about 2.2 million. This year alone, we've already encountered about 50 individuals on the known terror watch list. So can you explain a little bit about how we got here?
Yeah. Listen, the Biden administration talked about this during the campaign, that the Trump administration was inhumanely treating folks at the border. They were apprehending them and putting them in cages. We all remember the kids in cages comments and pictures and false accusations. So the Biden administration came in with that sort of mindset, that mentality. They wanted to undo a lot of what the Trump administration had put into place and allow folks to freely flow over the border. A lot of this is due to political considerations. The Democratic Party thinks that as many folks that are coming across the southern border into the United States, the better. They will end up voting for them in the elections. So that's sort of their mentality and going into this. But they did things like remove Title 42 protections. They've been talking about that for over a year and a half. They don't enforce any laws at the border. They apprehend folks, put them through the processing, loosely see who they are, or at least who they say they are, and then they let them into the interior of the country. And it's so that they can go and establish themselves and vote for Democrats in the midterms.
Right. And so we talk about encounters all the time. So, we're on track for 2.2 million encounters this year. Yeah. But encounters doesn't mean that they're actually turned away.
Right.
A lot of those folks are released into the country without any sort of vetting process.
That's right. So actually, I just looked up this number this morning. Last month, these numbers just came out on Tuesday, I think. There were over 280,000 of those cases at the border in that month alone. In this previous month. That's a record high, 250,000 people. But the thing about that is they only turn away about 40% of those 250,000 people. And that's every single month. So if you imagine, right, you said 1.7 million last year, 40% of those were turned away. That's it. 60%, they're still here and they're living in the United States and they're accessing our social safety net programs. They're able to establish themselves as if they're a U.S. citizen.
Yeah. And of course, there's a financial cost for the American people to this. This is about our economic interests, but also about our safety and security too. Like we talked about with the 50 known terrorists or individuals on the known terrorist list came over. A lot of those folks are probably members of the cartels. Can you talk a little bit about the cartel activity and how they're capitalizing on Biden's policies?
Yeah, I think this is a really good point, actually. Not too many folks see or know this, right? And a lot of people have been surprised by recent elections down in South Texas. And that all stems from this activity around cartels, drugs, and violence. So the border, because it's open and because so many foreigners have an interest in coming to the United States, it's become an industry. So it's the cartels operating and working on the border. They employ human traffickers, they employ drug traffickers, and they're all known criminals, right? They all are violent oftentimes, have criminal histories in the countries that they originate from. But the cartels do have operational control at the border. They're able to ship in. I mean, the fentanyl records are through the roof, record levels. Cocaine, marijuana, you name it, it's coming across. And then the worst scourge, I think, of this whole thing is the human trafficking. Cartels make a business, a very substantial and rewarding business for them. Trafficking individuals across the border. People are so desperate to get help through either the desert or the mountains or smuggled through processing facilities managed by, U.S. Officials. They pay all these folks thousands of dollars to get them across the border into the United States, and it's a cottage industry for the cartels.
Yeah, and so when the Biden administration or Democrats talk about how, how terrible the Trump admin policies were and how compassionate they want to be towards the immigration process, that's pretty much a lie. What they're doing is the opposite of compassion. They're putting individuals in danger. They're empowering criminals to manipulate the situation. So it really, they have no argument that it's compassionate.
It's definitely not compassion. I mean, the individuals coming across the border freely that are walking across an unmonitored border zone, right? They come into the United States. That's a person's property. They're often crossing into a ranch, a farm, a family's land, and they harass and assault these families and individuals on the border to get either access to food or water or money or just assistance in their travels. And so and they're criminals too, coming across the border. And so I mentioned this a little bit, but this is playing out already in elections in South Texas. People are fed up and they're saying no.
Right. So we obviously saw the Texas 34 election. Mayra Flores won, was the first Republican to win that seat since 1870. I mean, that's remarkable. So can you talk a little bit about the impacts that you think that the border crisis will have on elections, particularly in South Texas? I mean, we've heard the talking point so many times that every state is a border state, but that really is true. But we do know that border states like Texas, Arizona, they bear a lot of this burden. So can you talk a little bit about Mayra Flores and do you expect to see that amplified in midterm elections and beyond?
Yeah, I think this is a good point. And the Biden administration has made every state a border state. Just to make that point clear, yes, every state feels the effects of the border and immigration, but the Biden administration has taken a proactive and assertive role in shipping these folks around the country. They put them on planes and land them in cities and states at midnight, in the dark of under people, and basically like cloak and dagger sort of operations. They're flying them into these cities. So yeah, every state is a border state. I think that we're seeing that frustration and the negative impacts of that play out particularly in South Texas. Mayra's district is a 86% in the 80% Hispanic district, and they're tired of it. They're tired of the crime. They're tired of their own families having to go through these legal processes that take years and years and years to complete. They have to, take exams and prove their worthiness to be a U.S. citizen. Meanwhile, these people are just streaming into the country, and it's because the Biden administration refuses to enforce the law. So, like we've seen in South Texas, I think that's going to replicate across all the southern states that share a border particularly with Mexico. But you're going to see this play out in other places like Nevada. Nevada has an enormous Hispanic population. Even states like North Carolina, which have a growing and increasingly large Hispanic population, right? These voters who are all legal citizens now are taking umbrage with the cavalier nature of this administration.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to kind of look at how the Democrats have been treating the Hispanic voters, even outside of the border crisis. They take a look at the Hispanic population. They just see them as a voting bloc.
Yeah.
They don't see them as a community that they're engaging with. They think that they can, say a couple words about the Hispanic community and check that box, and then they'll be loyal voters to the Democrats. But the Democrats have really walked away from Hispanic voters, have walked away from their priorities, from their culture, from what's important to them. So I think that we will see, the same sort of Mayra Flores effect kind of ripple across border states.
I think that's a really good point. The lumping and categorization of folks, people don't like that. They don't, if you're an individual from Puerto Rico, you don't want to be called a Latin X or whatever this term is that Democrats lump you into, because that's not who you are. At the end of the day, you're a Puerto Rican, and that comes with a whole host of personal beliefs and values that you hold and bring with you. So people take offense to that, and it's playing out. And I think that they've taken advantage of the Hispanic population, and they expect their vote in November. They don't talk to those groups of people about their particular interests. Maybe the Hispanics in Nevada have a different inclination than folks in Texas or Arizona, and they just don't care. They just assume they're all the same.
Right, and I think that's what sets the conservative movement apart from the Democrats. That conservative candidates typically embrace individual responsibility, individual opportunity. They embrace the family unit, which is really especially important to a lot of Hispanic voters.
Oh, yeah.
And so you look at what the Democrats' priorities are, and they're so misaligned with the culture of a lot of these communities, with the culture of the entire country, I would really argue, in our history and traditions.
Right. And, this is a great point. They are focusing on transgender issues and not focused on the family, providing for the ills and trials and tribulations that families face on a daily basis. Right. And they're going after, the Democrats love to go after the oil and gas industry. I think that's something that hasn't been discussed much, but Texas is a huge oil and gas state. They produce a massive amount of both crude oil and natural gas. And those folks in South Texas all have jobs in the industry. So they're connected to it. They don't understand why Democrats are hell-bent on ending fossil fuel use like tomorrow, because and at the end of the day, they all understand that would be catastrophic to their bottom line, their economics at the kitchen table, and their ability to provide the basics of food and shelter.
Right, and they can't find baby formula. Of course, the border has a ton of it, but they can't find it.
Right.
And they're struggling with the same issues in Texas that they are everywhere else, like rising gas prices, shortages. They also don't want their kids to be taught divisive curriculum in school like CRT or gender identity. They just like everybody else. This is, the border is just one thing on top of it all. That, it's just one last kind of insult, slap in the face, these people who a lot of them have come over legally, or their parents have, or grandparents, or and they're looking at this saying, why are we getting the short end of the stick? Why is America being put last? If you emigrated to the United States, you came here for a reason. You came here for the individual opportunity. You came here, so that you'd have resources that you were able to put food on the table, that fill up your gas and go to work and, be part of a community. That's what the American dream is. And the Democrats think that they can just kind of, criticize the entire country, that they can make people feel like victims and almost bully people into voting for them. And it's not going to work anymore. I don't think it has, but I think it's going to be abundantly clear, especially in November and beyond, that this isn't going to work.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to pull on something there. I think the Democrats treat recent immigrants, as if they are still foreigners, right? That they're dealing with some sort of other issue set that the rest of us aren't. But at the end of the day, everyone in this, we all go to work, we all wake up, we all have to wear clothes, we all have to put gas in our car, we all have to buy food, we all have to provide for our children, we all have to make sure that we have jobs at the end of the work week, right? So we are all dealing with the same issues, and Democrats aren't addressing them. Inflation is rampant. They're spending oodles of money that no one understands why. So the same issues that everyone's dealing with the same issues, and Democrats are not addressing them. I think that at the end of the day is what they're feeling.
Yeah. So I want to get back to the border a little bit too, and talk about, if we, let's imagine that we do see this red wave kind of ripple effect in November, which I think we will. But let's imagine that happens. What should we expect Congress to do? What should we expect our state governments to do? And how should we expect an administration down the road, whether it's Republican or not? What should we be looking for?
I'll start with the states. So the states, you've seen some action recently. Arizona and Texas have taken some steps in this direction, and we're encouraging more. But they're starting to try and enforce the law at the border, and they're trying to apprehend folks that are there in their state illegally and try and process them through and get them into the deportation process. So there are steps that states can take utilizing state law enforcement agencies in conjunction with their national guards oftentimes to help secure the border or to do their part when the federal government is failing to do it or refusing to do it, which I think is a key part in this. The federal government is not unable, they're unwilling, and that's a key distinction. So states encourage governors and state legislatures to look into these issues and explore them to the ends of the earth. But at the federal level, there are a whole host of ideas, but the Republicans, we are anticipating, will have a majority next Congress, the 118th Congress. We're looking for a couple of things. We're looking to maintain Title 42. We want to re-implement the Migrant Protection Protocol, MPP, which is it's known as the Remain in Mexico policy. So it would keep individuals in Mexico. It would have the Mexican government maintain and sort of establish operational control on their side of the border to keep these people safe and secure and in the country of Mexico. We're also looking at things like fixing the Flores settlement and sort of President Trump talked about this often, changing the immigration system to more merit-based, right? Getting rid of, it's oftentimes the case that an individual can come over and extended family member after extended family member, cousins and second cousins and so forth can come over if they are if they're related to an individual here in the United States and they can be placed with them. Well, that all needs to end, and I think that we can point to the past 2 years or a year and a half so far of what the Biden administration has done to tell the American people that this needs to be the case, right? We cannot just be an open door society.
Right. I mean, a country without borders isn't a country at all.
Exactly.
We all know that. History has always told us that. We already have one of the most welcoming immigration systems in the entire world.
We do.
And, I think that people are now starting to see that borders matter.
Yeah. And
it seems like that should be kind of a basic thing, but even some prominent Democrats have come out and suggested that federal policy on the border needs to change. But it seems that there hasn't been any room or pathway for any sort of policy compromise or bill, especially in the Senate. Can you talk a little bit about kind of peel back the curtains in the Senate and why, even with some Democratic support, leadership is not moving this along?
Yeah, so, well, it's a little difficult, right? Because the House is controlled by Nancy Pelosi right now. I think there's probably a willingness amongst some Democrats to get onto a border security bill, especially if it's related to things like the Migrant Protection Protocol and Title 42. But at the end of the day, the Senate still has the filibuster. We would still need 10 Democrats to get on board with whatever package we are able to put together. What I will say is that we need to focus on border security. For the first time in a very long time, that needs to be the sole focus. For the past decade, we've been having iteration after iteration of comprehensive immigration reform is what they've called it. Well, we're in a different context now. 2 million plus individuals. By the time this administration, by the time the next majority comes in for the 118th Congress next year, it will be over, 3 million people have come into the country illegally. 3 million people. So it's a different world, and I think that we have an opportunity to highlight that. So the Republicans in the House will put together a package that does the things that I mentioned. Listen, at the end of the day, we want those policies enforced that I mentioned, and we want individuals verified of who they are. We want them to go through the legal processes that have been long established to become a U.S. citizen, and we can work on the others as we go along. But those are the basics, and we have to get back to those basics.
Right, and to me, it seems like that shouldn't be so difficult to get to. but the Democrats seem to never let a crisis go to waste, especially a crisis that they create.
And they truly believe that these people will vote for them or even have the ability to vote for them in future elections.
Right. And the future of America and our immigration system shouldn't be subject to political calculations from the left. It should be should obviously prioritize what puts America first, what puts our citizens first, what empowers our country financially and culturally. It shouldn't be just about politics, but unfortunately for the left, that seems to be a very common thread among a lot of what they do.
Yeah, the handing out of benefits, whether it's a financial benefit through a welfare program or a benefit in opening the border and allowing you to come into the country, right? Those are very purposeful tools to convince the public to vote for you. So that's what that's their operating sort of mentality.
Right. And so, hopefully we'll be able to flip the House and maybe the Senate back. But until then, we'll just keep hammering away. So for grassroots activists, what should they be doing?
Yes. I think this is a very good point. We're at a critical time right now. So my suggestion is to call both your House of Representatives member that represents you in your district and your senator for the state and urge them, plead with them that one of the top priorities when they get back in Congress, when they get back the Congress, that those first 10 pieces of legislation, one of them has to be on border security. And it can't be a package that involves amorphous technology to monitor the border and very weak proposals in basically plussing up funding. There have to be concrete solutions like enforcing Title 42, putting back in place the Migrant Protection Protocol, overturning the Flores settlement, and reducing that size of population that can come over based on familial ties. So all of those things need to be components. So urge your representatives, both in the House and the Senate, that needs to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point because we need to make it clear to our elected representatives that they represent us. Especially the Democrats need to realize that this is not going to work, that we need to take very basic steps to secure our border. Our safety, our economic prosperity should not be a bargaining chip for the Democrats to use, especially in election year, to manipulate what they think is going to be a political gain for them in the end. We need to tell our representatives that they need to stand up for our interests because once we have this flood of people coming across the border, there's really no turning back.
No, there's not. And the safety and security of the American people is paramount, should be paramount for these elected leaders. They swore oaths to uphold the Constitution. And so if I have a parting comment, that's it. That an open border undermines our constitutional order and our election system at large. And so make sure that your elected representatives know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back next week for some more On Air with Heritage Action.
That's it for another episode of On Air with Heritage Action. Thank you for tuning in. If you like what you heard in today's episode, please click the follow button. If you want to receive a text message each time a new episode airs, text podcast to 51776 and you'll never miss an episode. That's podcast to 51776. Hi, it's me again, and we need your help. If you like the insights and activist resources we are providing, please take 1 minute and help us spread the word. Share this episode with friends and family on social media, email, or text. We need everyone's help in the fight to hold Washington accountable. And don't forget, you are also able to subscribe and listen to episodes on your smartphone. Just open up your favorite podcast app and search for On Air with Heritage Action. Click subscribe and download episodes so you can take them with you on the go. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a thing. Thanks.